Hi, I'm Katie Wilson and welcome to A News. Here are the headlines. Stock markets had one of the worst weeks of the century after Trump tariffs take effect. A missile strike on the Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih kills 19 people and leaves dozens injured. Myanmar death toll exceeds 3,300 as the UN makes a renewed call to help the disaster-struck nation. US stocks are facing their worst week since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. It's after China's strong response to President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff announcement on Wednesday, fueling fears of a deeper global economic crisis.
Markets around the world tumbled this week, marking the worst performance for US stocks since the 2020 COVID pandemic. It's after President Donald Trump introduced tax hikes globally on Wednesday, slapping a 10% tariff on most US imports and much higher levies on dozens of countries, erecting the steepest trade barriers in more than 100 years. It's caused world leaders to condemn the move. The downturn continued on Friday after China's retaliation against Trump's new import taxes of 54%, a move that escalated trade tensions between two of the world's biggest economies. China retaliated with 34% tariffs on US goods, restrictions on key minerals, and blacklisting American firms. Analysts warned Trump's sweeping tariffs could lead to a global recession. The S&P 500 dropped nearly 6%, with companies wiping out $5 trillion in stock market value, according to reports. The Dow and Nasdaq also plunged. European and Asian markets felt the shockwaves too. Some companies like Apple and Nike saw major losses, while small business owners in the US say they may be forced to close. Despite the turmoil, Trump defended his trade approach. However, the Federal Reserve warned of rising prices and slower growth in the months ahead.
The US stock market has taken a hit since President Trump announced the imposition of new tariffs on foreign trade this week, but the White House remains confident in Trump's trade policies to protect key US industries. Ubi Shabandar has more from Washington.
President Trump remains confident that the tariffs that he signed into effect this week will play out positively for the American economy, a day after declaring Liberation Day for the United States and signing the most sweeping set of tariffs on foreign goods in modern American memory. The markets here in the U.S. remain volatile, with a sell-off on Wall Street taking place after the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, issued an assessment warning of inflation and a potential economic slowdown. President Trump hit back on social media, telling Powell that now is the time for the Fed to lower interest rates in order to help boost the economy. The White House also released the monthly jobs report, indicating that 228,000 jobs were added in the month of March, indicating that the labor market remains on solid footing and exceeded analyst expectations. President Trump also reacted to China, issuing its own retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. He blasted Beijing on social media and warned that China, quote, is playing it wrong. They panicked. Despite the detractors, Trump also posted on social media that his policies will never change, and he urged investors that now is the time to invest in the U.S., and that, quote, it was a great time to get rich. Hitting back at critics, the White House also highlighted on Friday specific cases of car manufacturing plants in the U.S. that were now increasing production lines due to the tariffs, and thus adding more jobs. The recent dip in the stock market may be a reflection of retail investors' anxiety on how the tariffs will play out. But the White House has said that they remain confident that over time, President Trump's tariffs will prove to be a massive boost to the economy. Ubi Shabandar, A News, Washington, D.C.
The International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva warns that President Trump's new tariffs could threaten global economic stability, calling them a significant risk amid rising trade tensions. In her statement, she said they have the potential to deepen uncertainty and hinder growth, particularly in an already fragile economic climate. This comes amid growing global fears that rising trade tensions could disrupt international markets. The IMF is analysing the broader effects, with further insights to be provided in their upcoming World Economic Outlook.
We are still assessing the macroeconomic implications of the announced tariff measures, but they clearly represent a significant risk to the global outlook at a time of sluggish growth. It is important to avoid steps that could further harm the world economy. We appeal to the United States and its trading partners to work constructively to resolve trade tensions and reduce uncertainty.
Joining me now from Paris to discuss stock markets, tariffs and economic outlook is economist Pascal de Lima. Thanks for joining us, Pascal. Now, we're seeing stock markets continuing to tumble as a result of these sweeping tariffs by the US. How worried should we be?
Well, yes, we should be concerned, of course, but not panicking, because what we're seeing is not a full market collapse, but it's a sharp correction that reflects growing anxiety. Effectively, investors are reacting to rising global tensions due to US tariffs, the potential for supply chain disruption too, and higher costs for companies, especially those that depend on import materials or export to the US. So while the financial system is on breaking down, this could become more serious if tariffs keeps escalating, retaliation continues, and confidence keeps falling, of course. But in short, this is not really the 2008, but it's a real stress test, of course, for the global economy.
And what's the rationale behind this deliberate effort to devalue the dollar?
The idea is strategic and political. Of course, a weaker dollar helps make US export cheaper, which is meant to reduce the trade deficit. But it's important to note that it also helps offset the inflationary impact of tariffs by making foreign goods less expensive in relative terms. And on the top of that, it means to encourage companies to manufacture locally by making foreign production more expensive. But there are trade-offs, of course. It risks triggering currency retaliation from other countries. It could drive inflation in the US, and it might destabilize global markets, especially in emerging economy that relies on dollar stability. So yes, there is a rational point of view, but it's a risky balancing act.
Really interesting insight there. Thank you so much for joining us, Pascal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, for more on the same subject, joining us from Baku to discuss the potential impact of the latest sweeping tariffs on the South Caucasus is Nargiz Mammadova, an expert in international relations at STEM Analytical Centre. Great to have you with us, Nargiz. So, we've already talked about global implications of these tariffs imposed by the US. What about the South Caucasus?
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. Let's start with the vision of Trump's of the world economy. And actually, it's very kind of hilarious how the Trump is implicated the world global economy nowadays. Everybody and each country expects that after coming the administration of to the Trump's administration to the power, the global geopolitics will change. However, yes, it's kind of changed, but the global economy changed even more because Trump always, even when he first became a president, talked with the language of economy and with the language of tariffs. So it's not something new to the world. However, is the world prepared for it? I don't know, especially in the case of EU. I think that the EU country is now on the test of and on a high depression test. How can they kind of deliver these challenges or not? However, if we saw in the context of the South Caucasus, first of all, we need to notice that the tariff policy or tariff diplomacy or the trade war, as you wish, you can call it, it's focused on the certain regions. It's focused on the EU, it's also focuses on Asia. However, what's connected the EU and the Asia, it's South Caucasus and the Central Asia, the tariffs are not kind of covering. So first of all, to relieve out all of these tariffs policy, which is of course heavy not only for the state's economy but for the world's economy, you need diversification of your trade relations. Okay, for each country, its trade relations, the huge opportunities of diversifications of the logistic transport corridors or other corridors. And for example, let's say South Caucasus, or particularly let's take Azerbaijan, who is on the crossroads of the middle corridor or north-south corridor. I think that the tariffs of Trump's policy will not directly affect on Azerbaijan or Georgia negatively. Indirectly, of course, we will have some implication of this tariffs policy while goods will be transported from Azerbaijan to Europe or from Europe to Azerbaijan. Of course, we can see some minor changes. However, first of all, Trump is not focusing on the one country in the South Caucasus. In Trump's administration's mind, the world is divided to the regions, and the South Caucasus region is the whole region in the political and economy vision of Trump's administration.
Really interesting insight there. Thanks for having us, Nargis.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
A Russian missile strike has killed at least 19 people, including 9 children, in the Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih. The attack is one of the deadliest this year, hitting residential areas in President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. While Russia's defense ministry claims it was targeting a military gathering, Ukrainian officials have dismissed that as misinformation.
The latest Russian strike has ripped through residential areas in the Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih on Friday, according to local officials. At least 19 people, including 9 children, were killed when apartment blocks were hit. Ukrainian emergency services say more than 50 people have been wounded, including a 3-month-old baby.
I have not seen the flash. I only heard the explosion. All windows, glass fell on me, but I was not hurt, surprisingly. There were dead children laying there, crying parents, horrible. And there was the crater, and there was smoke coming out of it, where there was the hit.
The Russian Defense Ministry claims its forces were targeting a military assembly point, but Ukraine's military dismissed the statement as blatant misinformation, accusing Moscow of hitting civilian infrastructure. Hours later, the town was hit again, this time by Russian drones. The city's military officials say private homes were struck, setting off fires in 4 locations. An elderly woman was killed in her house. 5 others were injured. US officials have in recent days tried to broker both a ceasefire for energy infrastructure and for the Black Sea. Kyiv says it's ready to agree to the maritime deal. However, Russian officials say Moscow first needs restored access to certain trade markets and payment systems.
The NATO foreign ministers' meeting in Brussels focused on discussions on the US push for NATO members to increase their defence spending to 5% of GDP. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also stated that it will soon be clear whether Russia is truly committed to peace with Ukraine.
The NATO Foreign Ministers' Summit in Brussels has addressed several critical issues that could redefine the future of the alliance. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has reiterated the US demand for NATO members to increase their defence spending, setting an ambitious target of 5% of GDP, up from the current 2% goal. Rubio emphasised that while reaching this target won't happen overnight, NATO must establish a clear pathway to achieving it.
The events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent. And so we do want to leave here with an understanding that we are on a pathway, a realistic pathway, to every single one of the members committing and fulfilling a promise to reach up to 5% of spending. That includes the United States will have to increase its percentage.
Poland, responding to the growing threat from Russia, has already committed to spending 5% of its GDP on defence by 2026.
Poland plans to spend 4.7% of GDP this year, the most among NATO countries, among European Union countries. We will continue this. 5% is definitely the goal that we want to achieve next year, to get closer and closer to 5%. And even due to the multi-year contracts that we have signed, we have to maintain a high level of spending for years to come.
The Russia-Ukraine war remained a top concern at the summit. NATO allies were urging Moscow to engage in serious peace talks. Ukraine has shown a willingness to accept a ceasefire, but the outcome depends largely on Russia's response. US officials have stated that the US will soon determine whether Russia is serious about peace.
We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not. I hope they are. It would be good for the world if that war ended. But obviously we have to test that proposition.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte weighed in on the ongoing security challenges, emphasising that NATO is united in its commitment to strengthening defence and supporting Ukraine.
For NATO, it's clear. For the whole of NATO, Russia is the long-term threat. Even if this war will come to an end, let's not be naive about Russia. Nobody is naive about Russia. But when it comes to ending the war, I think it is important that the Americans are trying this, working closely with the Ukrainians.
Rutte also addressed concerns about Trump's new tariffs, noting that the tariffs do not violate NATO's economic principles. He explained that while these tariffs have caused some disruption, they do not go against the core goals of NATO. Rubio also defended the tariffs, explaining that while markets are reacting to shifts in global trade, the situation is not an economic collapse. He argued that once businesses adjust to the new trade rules, markets will stabilise.
Tensions between the US and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program have escalated, while Russia emphasises that the issue should be resolved through diplomacy and restraint. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov affirmed Russia's ongoing alliance with Iran while working to improve relations with the United States. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has threatened military action against Iran unless a deal is reached on its nuclear program. Trump previously warned that Iran is nearing the development of a nuclear bomb, a claim Tehran denies, insisting its nuclear ambitions are for peaceful energy purposes. Russia has offered to mediate between the two nations. The death toll after the earthquake in Myanmar has reached more than 3,000 people. More than 4,500 are injured and at least 220 people are still missing. The quake, with a magnitude of 7.7, has left many people homeless and many are forced to sleep outdoors due to destroyed homes or concerns about further building collapses. The United Nations estimates that more than 3 million people may have been affected. Earlier, the UN announced that a severe lack of medical supplies is hindering relief efforts. Azerbaijan welcomes a new international resolution on landmine victims, adopted at the UN Human Rights Council on the International Day for Mine Awareness. The country says it marks an important step towards restoring the rights of millions affected by the devices. Azerbaijan is a co-sponsor and says the move brings global mine action to a new level. According to officials, more than 13% of Azerbaijan's territory is contaminated with landmines. Baku is calling for more international cooperation in urging Armenia to provide accurate minefield data.
Mine-contaminated areas in the world.
Yesterday, I spoke to Ben Keith, an international human rights barrister, on ways to help the victims of landmines, as well as the communities affected by the problem. He says they're looking at ways to compensate those affected by the devices.
Try and provide some redress to the victims of landmines. So our job is to try and get agreement at the UN to potentially alter the Ottawa Convention on Landmines, and also to provide a system by which redress can be made to victims of landmines and communities affected by landmines, both the physical issue of the landmines themselves making the land unusable and the environmental impact, as well as the damage to individuals. And so the main thing that we propose in this is the establishment of a UN fund for the victims of landmines, and we are working with civil society and governments and permanent missions at the United Nations to try and work out a system that will enable landmine victims to receive some redress and compensation.
Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey and Bulgaria have signed a memorandum of understanding to advance a new green energy corridor aimed at transmitting and trading renewable electricity across borders. Energy ministers from the four nations emphasised the strategic importance of inter-regional cooperation in renewable energy and energy security. The corridor will leverage Azerbaijan's renewable energy potential and aims to support the region's integration into European energy transmission systems. Turkey says it's making significant strides in its transition to clean energy. New data from the Energy Ministry reveals a shift towards renewables in the country's energy mix. Power generation from renewable energy sources in the country reached nearly half of the total electricity production by the end of the first quarter of the year.
Electricity generated from renewable energy sources in Turkey has reached nearly half of the country's total electricity production by the end of the first quarter of the year. That's according to data from the Energy Ministry, which shows that total electricity production in the first 3 months of the year hit 86.5 million megawatt-hours. Of that, 35 million megawatt-hours came from renewable sources such as solar, wind, geothermal, biomass and hydroelectric plants, including both dam and river-based facilities. Turkey says it's continuing to prioritize domestic and clean energy sources as part of its broader efforts to combat climate change and reduce its current account deficit. The number of renewable energy plants has now reached more than 34,000. The shift toward renewables aligns with Turkey's strategy to support its expanding industrial sector and meet the growing energy demand of its increasing population, all while reducing dependency on fossil fuel imports. By the end of March, the country's total installed electricity capacity climbed to more than 117,000 megawatts, with the renewable sources making up 60% of that total.
In the midst of a turbulent geopolitical landscape, the European Union is turning its attention to Central Asia, seeing it as a reliable partner in securing critical raw materials and green energy sources. At the first ever summit between the European Union and Central Asian countries in Samarkand, leaders agreed to elevate their cooperation to a strategic partnership. Our correspondent in the region, Fariza Kalamazina, has more.
Brussels has announced a new €12 billion investment package for the region as part of its Global Gateway initiative. Of this amount, €3 billion will be allocated to the transport sector, €2.5 billion for critical raw materials, €6.4 billion for energy and €100 million for the development of satellite internet in Central Asia. Some of these projects have already been approved and supported by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. As part of this new partnership, the President of the European Commission outlined 4 key areas for collaboration. First up, transport corridors. The European Union is committing €10 billion to develop the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, which will cut the land road between Europe and Central Asia by nearly half, down to just 15 days. Next, on critical raw materials, Ursula von der Leyen called Central Asia a treasure trove, highlighting its massive reserves of manganese, graphite, and other vital minerals. But Europe's approach is different. Rather than just extracting raw materials, the European Union is aiming to help create a full production cycle right in the region. In terms of renewable energy, the European Union sees Central Asia as a potential global hub. The President of the European Commission highlighted 2 major projects, the Rogun hydroelectric power plant in Tajikistan and the Kambarata hydroelectric power plant in Kyrgyzstan. Ursula von der Leyen called for expanding cooperation to help Central Asia become more energy independent and contribute to the global clean energy transition. The fourth area focuses on digital communications and satellite internet. The European Union is launching a satellite program to connect remote areas across the region. In turn, the leaders of Central Asia have expressed their commitment to strengthening trade ties. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev said that the country is ready to boost exports to the European Union across 175 key commodities, totaling more than $2 billion. Kazakhstan already produces 19 of the 34 raw materials the European Union needs, including uranium, copper, and lithium. In this context, President Tokayev proposed establishing a regional research center for rare earth metals in Astana. At the summit, Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev stressed the importance of regional security, particularly cooperation with Afghanistan. He called for constructive dialogue between the international community and the Afghan government. To solidify this partnership, Mirziyoyev proposed annual meetings at the Deputy Prime Minister level and the creation of a partnership committee. He also suggested that a roadmap be developed to implement the agreements made at the summit and that it be ready within a month. Fariza Kalimursina for A News in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for tuning in and keep watching A News.